Welcome to Grome House Museum's podcast, At Home with the Picts, a crafted legacy. I am your host, storyteller Eileen Budd, and throughout this podcast I will be taking you on a journey with me around Scotland and beyond, exploring Grome House Museum's collection, speaking to contemporary craftspeople, artists and musicians whose work uses the same or similar techniques to the Picts. In this podcast, we will meet stone carvers, weavers and carnix players. We will speak to academics, archaeologists and blacksmiths, and together explore how the Picts lived and how they made their art. Because, as George Bain once said, theory may inform, but practice convinces. The Metalwork episode. Metalworking and blacksmithing are one of our oldest industries, reaching all the way back to the Bronze Age and Iron Age. And what an incredible discovery it must have been to be able to take something from the ground, to melt it, turn it into a liquid, and then shape it to make tools and weapons from it. And I think this must be partly why some of our oldest stories in folklore are about blacksmiths, particularly stories about the blacksmith and the devil. Before we meet our metalsmiths, I'd like to tell you one such story. The Blacksmith of Cubbeen. There was once a blacksmith who lived by the sea. He was skilled but poor, and so one day the devil promised to make him rich, and all he had to do was make magical items for the devil's denizens, elf shot for the fairies, bridles for the kelpies, and swords that would never dull for the devil himself. "I can't make these things," said the smith. "I'll give you the knowledge if you promise you'll keep working for me. Keep smithing until I turn you out or the forge fire goes out, whichever happens first." And so it was. The smith of Cubbeen learned to add magic to his craft. Swords that never dulled, arrows that always found their mark. After a while, though, the smith longed to travel, and so one day he deliberately didn't tend the fire to let it go out. But the forge fire was the devil's fire, and of course it didn't go out. And as long as that fire burned, he could never leave his forge. And the blacksmith kept his pact with the devil for 7 long years. And then one day he saw the water horse of the sea, and he said to him, "I think you're the most braw beast. If I make you a new bridle, would you show me how high you can dive into the sea and make me the biggest wave you possibly can? I'd love to see that." "Certainly," laughed the water horse. And sure enough, the smith made the bridle, and sure enough, the water horse kept his word and dived into the sea from such a great height. It sent a huge wave of sand over the forge, which melted into this great big glass bubble, which then was immediately cooled and hardened by a great wave of seawater which followed it. And, stuck in a glass ball starved of oxygen, the fire in the forge went out. "Foolish smith," cried the devil, "you've lost your forge." "But the knowledge is mine to keep and teach," said the smith. And that's how the smiths in the east of Scotland became such masters of metal, or so they say. Let's meet our first metal expert, blacksmith Matty Flett, who I travelled all the way up to Portnocky to speak with.
Hello, I'm Matty Flett of Flett Forge. So I mostly make cutlery of various different types. Forge them out of lovely modern steel, which saves a lot of the heartache of trying to make your own steel, which helpfully I've got a chunk of here. That's how they would have made steel during the Pictish time. So that's all part of the process there. Use lots of recycled materials. Nice little bit of rebar here. That'll come off the beach. That'll get used for something. And yeah, every nook and cranny of the shed is just stuffed with materials that's been either found in the local area or somebody's given me.
Bits that you've got here.
So we'll go back to this bit of steel here first. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time when they were doing a demonstration just outside Elgin of how they made this. They reckoned that the site had been abandoned because the Romans were coming. So all the smelting pits and everything, all the metalworking areas were demolished, intentionally destroyed. And I think there was about 40 different little metalworking sites in this area, and this is what they were making. And it would be around the time of the Battle of Mons Grapus. They abandoned the site and filled in all the pits and left, and they don't know why. That's just a guess from what the archaeologist was saying. But this was the type of steel they were producing there, and it was en masse. You know, it was a big operation that was happening there, and that would have been pre-picked. I'm very thankful that I don't have to make that, because that's a massive process. You're having to mine the iron ore, which up here would probably be bog iron, and you need tons of it to produce just a little bit of steel. And then that's not even to mention the charcoal production, which would be, you know, you'd be months in the making to get enough charcoal to feed the smelter in the first place. So the amount of people involved in just making a little chunk of steel like this, you know, it would have been a big operation for it. You know, this whole villages probably would have been involved in doing this sort of stuff before it even got to the smith. So you would have had your miners, your charcoal makers, and just all the helpers you could imagine, you know, just running around sort of doing whatever was needed doing. And then you would have had the gruff, fancy, important people pretending to know what they're doing, trying to make the steel. I'm sure they did know what they're doing, because they did it.
That's the thing, it's like we sort of think about, you know, blacksmithing as being just about working with metal, but actually...
No, it involves so many other people, so many other crafts and skills, and it's, you know, you're not going to get the blacksmith if you don't have the weaver. You know, it's just that simple. Fabric is probably actually the more important thing. But once you get past the fabric, you start needing tools, and that's when the blacksmith comes in. But if you're not wearing clothes, you're not worried about tools. So.
It's true. And also woodworking as well, like you were saying, like with the handle, and so it's really like multi-skilled job.
And the worth of a piece of steel, because you get iron, which is well, steel without the carbon in it, but it's the carbon that makes it a useful tool. Because without the carbon which you're putting in, which depending on how they were doing it, would either have been animal bones or particular types of charcoal. Or,
it's interesting, isn't it? It's fascinating.
It's very interesting.
When you're making a blade like this, you need to temper it, don't you? How do you temper your blades?
Well, I imagine you're fairly familiar with the quenching part of the process. You know, you see it go into oil, water, or whatever, and comes up in a big ball of fire. Well, that part of it, that's where you quench it, is effectively freezing a piece of steel into its hardened form. Because before that, it's in its, what you call like a ductile form. It's annealed. And that's when it's soft and relaxed, and you can bend it and it won't return to its true shape. So you quench it, and then you need to heat it back up again to a few hundred degrees. And it's around about, let's say about 300 degrees Celsius is where I heat it to. And that just gives a little bit of flex. And so you can see that bends. So without quenching, that wouldn't bend and it wouldn't return true again. That would stay bent. The tempering is what makes steel able to do that and become useful as a weapon or tool. Because likes of a simple hammer, that'll be tempered at a different temperature and be made of a different steel than an edged weapon, tool, whatever it is, will be. Same with a woodworking tool, will be tempered and heat treated differently. I always reckon it to like a cake recipe. So your bit of steel is your raw ingredient, and depending on how you bake it effectively is how it will affect the end result. It's the same with the ingredients you put into the steel, and the way you bake it is going to affect the end result. And another thing that I think is interesting, you might be familiar with the epic poem of the Gododin. There's a wee bit in that when I think the line's something like blue-bladed spears meant like royalty, fancy like that. But actually, blue is a perfect tempering colour as well, which I think has been missed out from a lot of people's interpretations. But a perfectly tempered blade is often blue, and it'd be hard to see in the camera, but this one has a lovely blue.
It does have a bit of a blue sheen, yeah.
Hue to it. It doesn't. It's worn off now because this was made a couple of years ago. But that blue-bladed thing in the Gododin, I think, is actually referring to the blue polished blades of the spears, as well as inferences to royalty or what have you.
Of course, yeah.
Which is the Smith's perspective there.
Yeah, but I think that's fascinating because, like, you know, because you're working in that material, you would pick up on that. Whereas, like,
that's
an
very
academic
true.
Wouldn't necessarily pick up on that.
Yeah, and whether it's accurate or not, I do not know. It's just an idea, and this actually piece is actually quite a useful thing to look at here as well. The handle on this, this is one I made. It's made out of pewter, but it's got style that harks back to Roman Celtic era things. But this was, well, this is a copy of a 1700s Scottish dirk. So they're very well aware of their history when they're making these things, because this is very much Celtic, even going back as far as the Bronze Age in design. But this would have been late 1600s, 1700s, which I think is quite fascinating. So they were very well aware of a lot of the influences and the history behind various things, which I think is quite curious. I'd love to know the story behind these handles, because there's a bunch in the National Museum of Scotland and the various other collections, but obviously you can't speak to the makers, the original ones, so I wonder where the thought came for that, because it's very unique to Scotland, this type of handle at that era, in the 1700s. It's a curious one.
Yeah.
I'd love to know the backstory behind the thinkings. They're trying to tie back to like ancient sort of, imbuing themselves with sort of past glories and all that sort of stuff.
Trying to channel their ancestors.
Yeah,
or
some sort of status thing or something. I've been here since this, that kind of statement.
Yeah.
Or was it just, this is a really nice design and it came from here in the first place, so I'll have one of them, please. I don't know. People are the same all the time, so it's probably all of these things all at the same time.
Yes. Also, I know with some aspects of medieval armour and swords, it was very much linked to the fashion at the time.
Yeah,
so
of course,
if you look at male fashions for the medieval period, when it was like bows on your knees,
yeah,
that was super trendy. So you look at suits of armour and they've got the sort of metal versions of bows, which I think is quite amazing. So maybe there was a Celtic revival or a Pictish revival.
It could very well have been, because we see things coming back again and time again, so yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah.
There's so much pressure, isn't there, with academics, because especially if you look at, you find this in archaeology a lot, is that people are looking for definitive answers, like, well, what does that mean?
But there are no definitive answers.
That's it, and it keeps changing, which is why you've got like, well, theoretically we thought this before and now we think this.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
this changes things.
Right, so we're going to have a go at making one of these.
Beautiful penannular brooch, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And just for funness, you can take that off and use it like an awl, which I don't know, I just love that. Something about it's just quite fun.
That's right.
So we're going to make this out of a lovely nail and a piece of rebar. Usually I'd start off with it straight like that, but today, just for simplicity's sake, I've already cleaned up a few bits and pieces just to make the whole process go a little easier, but it gives you a good little rundown of sort of what happens. And it's also quite fun because you can just recycle, the steel needs to be a particular type of steel. Like I know rebar is it'll behave a certain way in the forge and under the hammer. So you couldn't just pick up any random piece of steel, but you could have a go at it, but the results will be, they may differ. And I use a nail because this has a wee bit of carbon in it, so I can actually harden this so the awl will actually be a usable tool rather than just bend or fall to bits, which is quite important if you're planning to use that for a long time. So the nail, I think it's probably it's got 0.4% carbon in it or something, but that's enough to harden it so it can be a usable tool. Whereas the rebar, it's got it's like 0.2% carbon, not enough to harden, but it makes it a good tough steel. Not that the thing like this needs to be particularly tough, but it certainly doesn't hurt.
Absolutely, especially if you're using a penannular brooch to keep your clothes together.
Yes. Or, hold a tripod above a fire as well. That's another good use for them. I love as well that penannular brooches go back to before the Bronze Age, because you find in the Bronze Age little antler ones where they've carved out the antler and made them into little brooches the same. So I don't know how old the design is, but it's still in use today. So you go right the way back to the first metalworking, and you find them, and you come right forward to the modern day, and there's still places in the world where they make them and use them every day, which I find quite fascinating. It's such a simple design, yet to our modern world of buttons and zips, it just seems pointless. But when you don't have a button or a zip, you'd be really pleased with a nine-hour brooch.
Absolutely. I think it's amazing that these simple designs, like the caltrop,
Yeah.
the simplicity of it means that it can be used, it can be
Absolutely,
made, it can be deployed so easily.
Yeah.
And it's
I
lethal.
keep one of the caltrops over there just for that reason, to show people.
Oh, fantastic.
Because they're terrifying things, caltrops.
They're awful. But they're wonderful.
So effective.
So effective.
Again, horrifyingly still in use to the modern day. Which is, something.
It comes down to really good design, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. I wonder how many design awards that could win.
Yeah, absolutely.
Since I knew you were coming, I looked into some Pictish metalwork just to see what I could find, and I was finding very little. But I did find a picture of the Golspie man, and he's got a dagger and an axe. So in the National Museum of Scotland it says it's a planking axe. It may very well be, but that shape, which is actually drawn down over here, it's a shape like this. It's a really thin cutting edge, not like an axe, imagine. And in India, they do have a style of axe there. It's called a mustache axe, but it's a weapon of war. And the guy in the Golspie picture, he's also got a dagger in the other hand. So if he's working wood, like planking axe would suggest, why has he got a dagger in the other hand? Anyway, so the axe was a wee bit ambitious to get done yesterday, but I did do the dagger, which is on the table behind you. So that's my take on the Golspie man's dagger. I think Hamish Lamley, he did a great illustration of the Golspie man. That I've loosely based the dagger on. Imagine this is the Golspie man's axe. I think it came out a wee bit, so it's got like a pawl on the back. The shaft would have went thusly, and then it was something like that. So you would have had a piece of hardenable steel welded into the cutting edge, which would have been forge welded, and then these two parts, there's probably a forge weld here, and then there's the eye of the axe as well, and the pawl to consider. So there's probably another bit of steel welded into the pawl somehow, and that'll have been wrapped around. So we're looking at 1, 2, 3, maybe even up to 5 different forge welds in this one little thing. And it's just mad to think, and they had to do it out of steel that started life like that. So that'll have had to be forged down and refined in a way that makes it accessible to us. Is when you watch Japanese smiths make raw Tamahagane steel, that's the same process. So yeah, how you get that into a finished thing like that just boggles my mind. So I probably would have asked them about the practicalities of making something like that.
Especially with all the specialist knowledge you would need to create something from scratch.
Yeah.
Like an axe, the woodworking skills, the smelting. I would imagine there would be lots of different people helping.
Yeah.
Whereas like now, you're doing absolutely everything.
Well, it would have been like a whole family doing it probably, or a whole extended family. You had Roundhouse doing one thing, Roundhouse doing another, and because you all needed each other to survive, basically.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It was much more. Yeah, I would imagine it'd be much more community based, because you had to survive, and you had to defend as well, and make and get by, and all the rest of it. Yeah, and I think working hours, I would imagine, would be something to do with daylight. Although if you've got fire, there's probably some.
Yeah, well, a lot of blacksmithing work needs to be done in the dark, which is again something you don't see in my setup here. And I just use the Japanese smiths as a really convenient example. When they're quenching bits of steel, they will actually wait for particular moons because they give the right light so you can see the colour of the steel, so they can more accurately predict the end result. Because when you're using raw materials like this, they behave very organically. It's not like the steel I use is homogeneous, and use the cake metaphor again. I know what I'm going to get at the end result if I treat it a certain way. Whereas a material like this, it's very organic. You don't know the exact composition of it, so you need to get everything absolutely right to make sure you're going to get the best out of it. So you need to wait for that moon to get the right light levels. You're going to do it. or else you're going to waste months of work to get the raw material. Yeah. So you need to get it right. I just use the Japanese guys as an example because I think it's the same techniques that they would have used here a long time ago. Just they're the last tradition that I know still does the same kind of things.
It makes me think of, the recumbent stone circles.
Yeah.
The chart where the moon rises and There's like, what if the recumbent stone circles are actually just helping people work out their smithing time?
You've no idea.
Yeah, you don't know.
That's the Picts were a cattle culture, an agricultural culture. So all these things have been tied in together. I think there's a much more of a oneness to everything than people seem to think it is. We all seem to think we're on our own tangents, doing our own thing, but it's all one of a whole. All of it informs the other.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree.
All that glitters is not iron, of course, and we couldn't have a metalwork episode without including the insight of a goldsmith. And so I headed off to Perthshire to speak with Rona Dalgleish.
I'm Rona Dalgleish as of Wasted Remains. I've been doing the jewellery thing for quite a while. Studied it in college. College was the best thing for me. Get your hands on the tools, learn loads of different techniques, having experience with people from all over the world really. You meet people that have been doing it for years, you meet people that have been doing it for 5 minutes, but they've all got some sort of story to tell about jewellery. So I was always fascinated how you could have your own take on things. So from college then there was always a push towards doing art school. That's great for a lot of people. For me, I wanted to learn everything from sizing to setting to all the nitty gritty things before I decided to design my own jewellery. So went to a jobbing jewellers and just kind of learned repairs, sizings and the little intricacies of repair work first, and then worked my way up through different workshops, from things in Glasgow, New Zealand, doing my own things like in the garage to working in some serious cool workshops all over the place. So it's been lots of bitty experience, and I've kind of come back to it now with a load of experience, a load of passion, and now hopefully plenty of time to make it all.
It's really easy getting that time. What drew you towards historic jewellery? What drew you towards Picts?
Always been interested with cairns, things like that have been left behind, but I misunderstood that the only replicas, the only relics that we had, the only artefacts were Roman and Viking. It's kind of all you see, and from an untrained eye I didn't appreciate that Scotland has such a plethora of incredible craftsmanship. So that's been a more recent deep dive. I've always loved the museums, but actually whittling down the inspiration to what was actually made here by people in Scotland, and it's amazing. I wonder how they made it, how many people were involved in making it. Was it one craftsman? Was it a team? Were they specialised in different areas? So getting my hands to my own tools and trying to recreate that has just opened up so many doors and so many lists of jewellery that I'd love to give a go at. So yeah, it's been a more recent thing, stepping into making myself, but really it started with visiting museums and dancing about castles and climbing into cairns that really got the history bug growing. So yeah.
And as you've been working with more historic pieces or using that as kind of inspiration, have you noticed connections between the historic pieces and the modern tools that you now use?
It's more of a disconnect I'm noticing. How much I use power tools, things like that. We use a pending motor that, cuts down on the hours of work. We've got big polishing motors and things like that. So there's a lot of things, just beginning with looking at historical jewellery, that I see how I come from such an advantage having these power tools, and I'm really starting to look at what tools they would have used going back. Things like the hammers and things like that. I love that connection. That's something that's never changed. It's always been steel against silver and gold. But I've kind of more recently noticing how much there's a disconnect between what we do now, and also artificial light is a huge thing as well. I don't have a huge amount of light in here, so when it gets to 4 or 5 o'clock I'm kind of going, how did they do this? So there's been a range of different tools that have maybe stayed the same but mostly advanced, with inverted commas, just kind of going to cut down on the hours really. So it's been interesting. Definitely more to explore there.
And is there any particular piece that you've seen in a museum that you were like, whoa, I really want to make that?
So many. There's things like the Clooney penannular brooches. That is just, that would be a life's work for me to make. So I'm maybe looking at taking a little element of it, like the animal heads. I love the zoomorphic representation of animals and how they've got them quite stylised. Like even in modern terms, they are beautiful. So I think I'd maybe take elements from them to recreate. But yeah, definitely a lot to look at in terms of the inspiration side of things. And also from the learning point, there's going to be so many things that I take on that blow my mind, and I'll either learn it or I'll scream at my tools and try something different. For example, I make a hand pin that was found in Ireland. It's a style that's found all across Celtic Britain really. But there's just a checkering style, and from growing up, my dad's a gunsmith. He does that on the wood to give extra grip. And I've always seen it done. I've never done it on my own. And then realising that an artefact that has been made 1,000 years ago plus is actually the same technique of crossing a file to make a catched pattern. So that was quite an inspiring kind of piece to take on, where it's like, oh my goodness, there's so many things that link together.
Have you ever discovered that you needed to also make your own tool in order to make it look the way you wanted it to?
Definitely, just like the circle with the dot in the centre. Something like that can be recreated in modern tools, but it's quite hard to get the size that you're looking for. So on this occasion, I kind of took an old tool and made it into a sort of cup bar, as we would call it, and then to just hammer. Instead of scribing everything, I was able to hammer the mark. Something like that. I'm recreating something that I don't have easily accessible here, but it was probably something they had plenty of back then. I'd like to get my hands on some sort of tooling steel and kind of remake some things as well to achieve what they did back then.
And we know that the Picts were using recycled silver, so like they were using bits and pieces that they'd either raided off the Romans or traded with the Romans. Do you use any recycled silver? Do you remake things? Is there any examples of that?
Yeah, definitely. I love that that's not changed. We've always been kind of magpies for shiny things and nothing goes to waste. And that's exactly what I've spent most of my time doing actually, is all the cut-offs and things like that get remelted. It was one of the first tools I really needed, was a big torch so I could do that. Making it into a bar, rolling it down, using the drawbench to pull it out, things like that. Definitely the drawbench has been something that's quite an old mechanism, and I'm sure they would have used something very similar to it to make the wire and the sheets and things like that they use. It's so integral to reuse materials because it's valuable, and a lot of it ends up in my bench skin under my bench there, and it's all collected, remelted, reused, because it's not like flour that kind of goes to waste. If you've been making a cake, you absolutely can melt down and realloy things to it's always more expensive to buy fresh, but if you can use all the scrapings, it works well.
And have you got any interest in the use of stones or natural stones or gemstones in your work?
Yes, absolutely. I love gemstones. So from my experience coming from making engagement rings, wedding rings, things like that, I was in a sort of high-end jewellers. Now I'm at a point where diamonds are amazing. They are absolutely the easiest to set because they are the hardest gemstone, but I've been moving my focus more to what they used back then. The stones that we have in Scotland. We have stunning agates, we've got jaspers, we've got the Cairngorm quartz, and I've made jewellery for people in the past and I've bought a stone. It's via a gem store in London, they get their gemstone from somewhere else, and there's a long line of people that are involved in getting this gemstone to a customer that pays a decent price for it. Whereas I just know a guy called Nat that lives in Fife, and he goes out with his red setter and picks up agates and cuts them himself, and it's one guy that brings these stunning stones from the ground to a high polished finish, and then I get the joy of spending a lot of money going to visit him and picking out some absolute Bobby Dazzlers. So it's been really nice to actually bring Scottish stones back into the limelight, because it's what they were using and have been using for years. They're still in the ground and it's less invasive because they're usually just in ploughed fields. So So he just goes out with his dog and picks up beautiful stones, and you're getting to really reduce the kind of chain of hands that are involved in getting the gemstones. So yeah, definitely more focus on locally sourced gemstones. It can be done. Same with metals as well.
Tell us about a wee bit about some of the things that you're making now.
Yeah, well at the moment I'm working on my Burghead ring, which was based on the beautiful kite-shaped ring that was found up in Burghead that was, as you may know, a big Pictish fort, huge. And it's amazing to work with the likes of Gordon Noble, who had asked for it to be commissioned, and I just loved getting involved with it. It's a more intricate commission that I'd taken on, really stepping into what they would have done in such small scale. And that was just a stunning one to recreate because they know the stone that was in it, and being able to recreate it in the copper alloy like the original, it's really something quite special. So that one I'm really, really proud of. And the gentleman who actually picked it up out of the ground, he was volunteering at the dig, metal detectorist from Linlithgow. He was working away on the dig and he actually was the one that uncovered it, which is so special. His wife actually purchased a ring for him, so he now has one that he can hold in his hands forever. Like the original find obviously has to go to the National Museum, so that's kind of how the inspiration started for me. I see something in a museum and I want to make it. So really special that kind of come full circle, that he found it and now he has his own version of it. So besides the Burghead ring, which I've absolutely loved, the journey sort of started with a Roman piece actually. It's a little goat, again with the animals, I absolutely love it. And that was found in Western Bartonshire. There's actually a crannog nearby that they found. It's in Dumbuck area, and that's been a really special one, and it's just something I love to make myself. So each one I kind of tackle, it just seems to, you're stepping back in time with each little file stroke and things like that. You're working on something so similar, and that's why I love the replica work. Recreating something as close as you can to an original, that's where you get your racing heart. You're like, get really excited about it, and obviously want to do a really good job with everything I make. So,
and as you're working on these pieces, when you're stepping back in time, as you say, can you envisage what a Pictish jeweller would have been doing on a day-to-day basis? Like what that day might have looked like for them?
I would like to think that there was actually quite a lot of people working in kind of goldsmith metal workshop, just with how many things need done, from refining the metal to get the metal ready into sheet or into wire. There's the making of the tools as well, so a blacksmith would be involved. There's also like someone that would make all the candles and all the lighting, because it's some serious detailed work. So things like that, I kind of feel like it wouldn't just be a solo thing. I've benefited from having loads of experience in busy workshops, that now I can kind of take my time, be peace and quiet, put on my mad music and get into it. But definitely the focus involved in it requires having all those ducks in a line, having the right tools, having this, so you're not stop start, because it's hugely dependent on light and what was happening. If there was orders coming through, people visiting, you need to be on the ball. So yeah, I would probably say that was it.
Yeah. And as you've been working on historic pieces, what has been the thing that has surprised you the most about trying to recreate a historic piece?
It's going to be the level of detail. Having said, you know, coming from a more contemporary jewellery background and stone setting, we use microscopes that have huge magnification, and I'm able to work away fairly easy. Now I don't have those pieces of equipment, and I'm going back to doing it with my bare eyes, and I'm seeing how were they able to do such tiny detail. I work a lot in wax as well, which is obviously a lot easier. There's a lot less waste involved than if you were doing it in metal. And working in wax, which I would like to think they were doing as well, it's far easier to achieve the level of detail in a tiny space, because if you muck it up you can add a bit of wax again and redo it again. But I think predominantly they would have used metal. They would have been engraving, they would have been filing, they would have been forming these pieces of metal by hand, and they're usually always in immaculate large pieces. At least the ones that we've found are generally huge big penannulars, and the level of detail is insane on it, that if you mucked one bit up, you know, You'd probably get more than a scalp in the back of the head for doing it. So yeah, I would say hugely it's been the level of detail that has blown me away and still does. They were actually incredible craftsmen, and they had trade links with places all over the world because you've got these materials that they can trace back. So there was a lot of trading, and it wasn't just eat and grow. That was probably the last thing as well. To do this level of work and have this amount of concentration, you need to be well fed.
Absolutely. And you need people to be looking after you as well, because if you're working in the workshop, you need somebody to be bringing food, something to drink at least.
Yeah, and obviously there would have been quite unsettling times as well. Like, you would probably be telling the women and kids first that something bad was happening, but also the people that were looking after the gold and silver, you'd be letting them know as well, because it's really, really valuable. So I definitely think that community that would have had to have existed for a goldsmith to do the work, and all the surrounding people to be part of it.
I'm just thinking about what you were saying about the level of detail. And the fact with modern times you've got these like amazing magnification glasses and things. Can you imagine a Pict using, say, like highly polished quartz for magnification, or glass? Because we know that they had glass. Do you think that's possible? This is just theoretical.
Yeah, definitely. I love that side of it as well, because once you're in any kind of historical, like anything that's looking back in time, you always kind of go, what if this, what if that? And I would say they would definitely be implementing it if they had it. They would definitely be implementing it, because there's engraving that, I'm blinking, hoping that it'll come into focus, but it's absolutely tiny. Even looking at things in the museum where they're really, they're beautifully presented with loads of light, and I just don't know how you would have even the tools to do it that small. I want to know what they were maybe using, because I know that they had records of sort of crystal balls. Something like that could have helped them see such tiny detail. I know that they have lots of evidence of like the mirrors as well, and it's something I've been thinking a lot about again with the mention of light, is that if that was maybe used to amplify things, because I know they have finds from, I think it's Egypt, where they have large polished dishes that were used with candles and things so that they could even reflect sunlight or candlelight. So I think there was a lot of implements that we maybe don't understand or have completely just not found yet that were used to help them see such minuscule levels of detail. So yeah, surely they must have had something.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we're thinking about light much later on in humanities, cultures and things. You get these beautiful candle holders that have got reflective, like copper or some kind of reflective material to amplify that light.
Definitely.
Before electricity. So yeah, I think it seems to me that it must have been such a universal idea, because you see it repeated all throughout history. Have you noticed anything related to jewellery within the sculptured stone?
Well, there has been one actually, again theorising. There's always the image of the cauldron that is represented in Pictish stones, and there's one near Inverurie that I visited just this year, and it actually looks like a stack of weights. It doesn't have the bar through it, so it doesn't quite have the same feel of the cauldron carving, but the circle within a circle within a circle within a circle is like the top down view of a nest of weights. I forget the French name for it, but they're quite commonly used, and they would use for scales and things like that. And having done a wee bit of research and knowing that the links between metalworking with gold and how it was kind of the first bank, gold, silver, things like that were used like currency, it would be a status symbol for them to have scales. It means that they were working with metal. There was an element of wealth kind of being portrayed with that. So that's potentially one. But besides that, it would only be like torques, I guess, were represented sometimes, but not as prevalent as the kind of animal figures and the symbols. So still something to, dig around on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in Meffin on Monday, and they have a stone which shows a penannular brooch, and I took a picture of it. I'm going to send you the photograph of
Please
it.
do.
Look at it.
Definitely. Oh, I'm absolutely keen. It's always that thing, you're looking at it with the light and bringing your phone torch up and stuff like that, and you go, is that what I think it is?
Can I ask if you use moulds at all? Is there any evidence for the Picts having used moulds in jewellery?
Yeah, there is actually. Just down in Perth Museum actually. They have a stunning mould that has, I think it's 5 or 6 rings in it, of all quite different detail. And I am absolutely chomping at the bit to have a play about with it. Obviously it's an artefact, we won't be touching it. But even if there was a process of maybe doing 3D printing to recover what those rings would have looked like, I would be first in line to see that. Usually what you normally see is more like ingots and penannulars, kind of base metal moulding for the first step in making a piece of jewellery. But there's level of detail in this particular one in the Perth Museum that's just got me going, wow, it's really, really interesting. So that's something obviously they've made, and I don't know exactly the composition of it, whether it's like clay moulds that they've carved, but yeah, definitely the ones that we've still found is like the moulds that we have. They're beautiful, they're absolutely stunning, because you're really seeing an insight into how they would have done it. I think up in Orkney they've actually got a beautiful exhibit that shows kind of ingot moulds and a little ring mould and things like that. It's just like, it really takes you through the whole process, and you can see, you know, they've been Pictish hands on that. There's an interesting one that I believe Gordon was actually speaking of, was a fairly simple spiral ring that had been cast, it had been moulded and cast. And it's funny because being in wire, that's a relatively straightforward thing to do. So we were trying to theorise, like, why would they have done something like this that you could have done in wire? Is it something that maybe people have found an artefact, a later artefact, they've then moulded it to recreate that exact one? Or was it a training thing? Was it something to be like, okay, you're going to learn how to mould make, we'll just use this, da 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 da. So it's like, it's fascinating to wonder, like, why were they using those moulds, what was the process? And it's just like piecing together, it's like you're a detective going back in time. But yeah, definitely in modern times we use the moulds, for sure. They're really, really helpful.
Yes, no, absolutely. Especially if you're spending a lot of time doing very complicated patterns. The idea of having to go through all those hours again, when actually you could use silicone or and replicate it fairly easily.
For particularly with the Burghead ring as well. They found that in 2023 with Gordon's team, and then when they posted about it, Hamish and I were up demonstrating on the dig. He was showing his leather work, and the day after they found another version of the ring, so it's like, I could have seen it with my own eyes. But at least that they seem to be the same style of ring that's replicated, and hopefully the area that they're digging at this year is potentially a metalworker's workshop. Looks like they found other things that maybe identify the fact that they were making potentially that ring there. So they've got the great one that was found 2023, and then the one that was found just last year. It's a little bit, you know, maybe a miscast or something like that. It doesn't seem it's down to just corrosion. It was maybe something that wasn't quite right about it, so it's maybe going back in the crucible, and that's so exciting. I want to go and help next year.
And if you could go back in time for a day, what would you ask one of your contemporary Pictish jewellery makers?
Oh, it would have to maybe be like, what were they using for files and abrasives and things like that? Because in modern terms we go through grades of abrasives, so it's like we use some that are impregnated with garnet, different grits, different sands. So imagine when they had things like beeswax and things that are tar or something that could harden sands and grit onto things. Were they making their own sandpaper? How were they doing things? I've heard you can also use like a shark skin, as a dog shark potentially was used. So things like that, it would be the tools. It would be how were you doing that to such great like polish and things like that. It's just mesmerising. One of like 1,000 questions I would ask. Yeah. I'd just stay, I think. Leave me here.
Oh, well, it's been just so wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing all your skills and your insights into these amazing pieces.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for taking an interest, and yeah, there'll be more coming soon.
Special thanks to all our guests for sharing their time, skills and expertise with us. Thanks to Grome House Museum for letting us explore their collections. Huge thanks to Debbie R. Moore for the wonderful sound design, And of course, special thanks to the Heritage Lottery Fund for their support in making this series possible.